so I dedicate this day to my father. I was born in Africa, Angola, and 1.5 years ago, I came to Zimbabwe, being the first time in 50 years that I was not in my home continent. Now, as a grandmother, I returned. And I deeply bow still today to my ancestors, who I then felt singing and dancing for me, as when we do when our children return from a long, very long journey. My father was Portuguese, my mother is Angolan, and from my mother's lineage, I have to share with you that they said these myths that was told to generations that we descend from the iconic Queen Jinga of the Ambundu kingdoms of Ngondo in the 16th and 17th centuries. Well, from this very same ancestry, I certainly, and that is a fact, not a myth, I certainly also descend from slaves and slavers. All of them mix in my own blood and soul. And it is not an easy union to reconcile within one own soul. Slaves and slavers, ancestors from Africa, India, and Europe I have. Queens and peasants, all boiling under the surface of consciousness, in a boiling pot of grief, sorrow, pain, imprisonment, violence, powerlessness, but also passion, rhythm, instinct, rootedness, colors, strength, and relentless hope. Well, and to engage in this fusion, this alchemy of psyche, this inner boiling pot is not always for the faint at heart, but is a fundamental process for evolution. So, I had the sunny beaches of Angola, beautiful ones, within me, and the high snowy mountains of the northern mainland Portugal to reunite within myself. But don't we all have that? Don't we have all polarities to reunite within our own souls? We all need to reconcile our opposites, our saints and demons, our brightest endeavors and our dark night of the souls. To a lesser or greater degree, we all have to reconcile several pairs of paradoxes in our human condition. It's an extremely hard task that demands being awakened and the courage to starting to accept the standpoint where we are, here, right now, no matter how difficult it might be. And you know what I mean when you look at our world. There is no real change without acceptance of what is in the first place. So in my personal case, building bridges between my dark-skinned ancestry and my blue-eyed one meant coming to terms inside myself first, I insist, with very different views of the world, that along my life led me to divided paths. Should I go to the diplomatic career when I was 20? I was in college, studying for the diplomatic career, or should I become a psychotherapist? Should I go to the finance corporate or become a writer? And I did it all, because I'm an Aquarian. We like to experiment. Well, the pull inside that my ancestry handed down to me was enormous, and only with really diplomacy inside. Better said, patience, lots of patience. We have to have lots of patience for our own selves. And of course, I needed therapy, secretly, sort of a way out of the inner labyrinth of my complex inheritance. Last year I visited Robben Island, the island prison where Nelson Mandela was captive for almost 20 years. You know that the island had been a human garbage can, with lepers, paupers, the mentally ill had been dumped like trash for centuries. Like life always brings us living metaphors for our own evolution. So, as a worker of psychology myself, and human shadow, I knew that when on that tour that I called pilgrimage to Robben Island, I knew that I had to look to my own shadow, my own inner outsiders, my unexpressed selves, my untapped potential, waiting in the dark of the unconscious. I knew that in that journey in Robben Island, that implied another level of integration of the layers of my personal shadow. And only with compassion, with humble presence, with wise openness, with profound patience, can we welcome these prisoners, that I call them prisoners sometimes, that we keep in the scorching dungeons of the solitary and many times severe prison cells that we transport within. Too many times is the case in the individual and in the collective groups. that these undesirable fellows are only outside, though. The enemy is always outside, is it? Are we acquainted with that part of us that seems to look always for the opposite of what we think we consciously wish for? There is a stage, in the psychoalchemical process of becoming ever more conscious human beings, where we need to disintegrate in order to reach a new arrangement of our system, so to speak. The ancient alchemists, which I love to study, they called it the black opus, a obra ao negro. It's when we experience a crisis of all sorts. We disintegrate. And there is a purpose for that. We disintegrate old values, belief systems, attitudes that no longer have any power to fertilize any new psychological growth. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, there is always a price to pay, whether to evolve or to regress. We just have to choose. And one of the sacrifices requiring for evolving is the sacrifice of the illusion that the enemy is always outside. And if we don't engage in this serious act of inner reflection, we will continue even today to throw bombs and missiles to one another, as we can see right now, most terribly in Europe, for example. We have to be able to disassemble our inner grenades, our violence inside. And we see the street of the world, that violence, that raw instinct, not yet cooked by the fire of consciousness. This is for me a fundamental aspect of the process of becoming conscious feminine and conscious masculine. And by the way, here I don't mean gender or so please maintain this speech out of the present debates on trans women or men. Here, by feminine and masculine, I'm signifying modalities of being, ways of being and doing that belong to all of us, every human being, like active and receptive, introversion and extroversion, competitiveness, cooperation, conscious or subconscious minds. All of us have these. So I've been devoting the last 20 years of my life studying, researching, writing about the conscious feminine, which is great passion. And I teach and learn all the time that the feminine are the 4 Ps. So whoever masters more the 4 Ps has a more healed and whole and blossoming feminine within. The P of process, the P of paradox, the P of presence, and the P of pleasure. Process is a feminine value. Product is a masculine value. For instance, the final result. You have something to do. You have a final deadline. So the process is feminine. How you get into it. The final result is product, is masculine. And of course we have to embrace both because we have many things to deliver in the several processes of life. So both women and men integrate the 2 polarities. Women, by our particular essential characteristics, we are invited to be masters of the process, whether the one of growing babies, or the one of cooking a meal, or the one of writing a book. And there is a particular bliss in surrendering to the process, and not being victims of the anxiety of achieving the end results all the time. Let me mention a few. Life won't slip fast through our fingers. More creative and inspired solutions arise when we are fully present, the P of the presence, for the requirements of the moment. There is more pleasure, the P of the pleasure, in enjoying life in a moment. Time is a non-renewable resource, I'm sorry, with no regrets of the time that went by and that we couldn't properly value and live. So process is a feminine value, as the process for achieving peace. We have to be relationship-oriented, which is a feminine characteristic both in men and women. It's from the psyche. So we need to be relationship-oriented in order to be successful, both in our marital relationships or in the arena of international ones, of course. A win-win situation is a much feminine standpoint, or I would say feminine wisdom, out of the fundamental truth that to have life, we have to protect life as the most precious value, beyond any belief system, any frontier, or other walls. Our feminine soul, when awakened, is the inner compass that tells us when an ideal is working against life, or instead is honoring the most sacred value, which is life. And this is paramount today in our restless world. So the second P of conscious feminine is the P of paradox. And I'm afraid Shakespeare was wrong when he said to be or not to be, that is the question. I dare to say that from a feminine standpoint, to be and not to be, that is the question. Because we are what we think we are, and we also are what we ignore about us. To be and not to be, that is the real question. This embracing of polarities is the most feminine essence and value. So now as a woman, as lunar beings in our feminine monthly cycles, we instinctively know well the pull of the tides. When we are in a new moon state of mind, we are secretive, inner-oriented, not available, even rough sometimes, very sensitive, and you know what I mean. But when we are in a full moon mode, we are gloriously open, willingly engaged, pleasurably blossoming. So the feminine wisdom embraces the full circle, 360 degrees of the elliptical of life. I need not to remind that this means all angles of eros and thanatos, the Greek words for life and death, to have and to let go. And do not mistake this capacity for embracing the paradox with weakness. On the contrary, remember that in the inevitable moments of chaos, confusion, and difficulty in our lives, the capacity to bring together and draw the best of all parties, movements, factions, is the hardest job, the most precious talent. So embracing paradox is quite a feminine value that teaches that we can be different and coexist peacefully, enriched by the complexities each other brings to the table. And this can seem a nice thing to say, but it's not very poetic when in a warlike situation, or when women still endure paramount difficulties in their daily lives. But it's this very same capacity to embrace the paradox that keeps us alive. And this is also an excellent key to a world so shaped by the greedy love for power, yet so inexperienced in embracing of paradox that teaches us to let go, to release, to give away. In the above-mentioned psychic alchemical process, the stage that follows the nigredo is the albedo, the white stage of the opus. After a crisis in our lives, after a disintegration, we are invited by nature to separate inner components. After melting down, we can separate the waters and gain a new clarity on what is really important to us. In this stage, after a crisis of all sorts, after being in the bottom down, in the dark nights of the soul, we start looking for answers, we start looking for more clarity, we start going within, hopefully, sometimes we don't, but hopefully, and to sort things, like in the Psyche and Eros mythology, when one of the tasks of goddess Aphrodite, Greek mythology, when she said that in order to find Eros, her lost beloved, Psyche had to, from 9 to morning, to sort out millions of seeds in one small room, alone. So millions of seeds from the floor to the ceiling, and if she had one night, if she wanted to have her lover recovered. And of course it was impossible for her. And they came there with the ants. The myth said the ant camps, the ants symbolize the instinct. So we have to recover our instinct wisdom. And they sorted all the seeds, all kinds of seeds you can imagine. And in the morning, she did a test. The seeds are mixed values, mixed beliefs, things that we no longer need. We have to sort things out in this stage of the alchemical process, We have to say, now what was true to me back then, but now after this crisis, no. I have to sort the seeds out. I have to understand what are valuable and what are the ones that are looking only to waste my time and my energy, which is a non-renewable resource. Life is not. In this life, this time is not renewable. It has to be, it's very precious. So, in this stage, we consciously ask for help to strengthen our purpose, we clarify our vision, we reinforce the commitment with what is really important to us. And what is not, we are inviting to let go. Every stage in life demands a price to be paid for a new completion and a renewed sense of purpose. And only with purpose can we endure the sometimes extremely hard spinning between the paradoxical moments of our lives. Only with purpose. We have to instill this in our children. Purpose and meaning in life. Many years ago, when I lost a child, or 7 years ago when I got widowed too soon because my first husband died with cancer, or when both my parents got several cancers, or when I was dying in a coma 2 years ago, exactly, due to COVID. All these were just my moments of Nigredo. Each one of us has their own, just mine. But they were moments of complete dissolution and renewal. And they were very blessed to me. I gained a new purpose to be alive now. Clearly I had to do my mourning and grievances and rebirth. But I would say that rebirth is the word for us now, individual and collectively. So giving birth to ourselves. It's an ongoing process. And today I'm inviting you to think about it. How can I give birth to myself in a new way, with a new sense of purpose and meaning and clarity and vision and fire and passion? Hopefully with more clarity and a reinforced sense of purpose that, as we see, often generates from suffering, we can cross the next alchemical stage. So the citrinas, or the orange color of the opus, of the alchemical opus. And here, at this stage, we are no longer, we already see things more clear. We have new books, we have new inspirations, we have new life within us. And here one word comes to my mind, which is forgiveness. It's not, as I would like to say, a syrupy, childish, idealistical, disembodied forgiveness. That doesn't work. No, it's the real thing. It's the forgiveness that comes from a soul strong enough to be consciously vulnerable. It takes a lot of guts to forgive, to ourselves and others, and to be consciously vulnerable. And while I would need a whole extra hour to explain what I mean by conscious vulnerability, not having the time and not wanting to be misunderstood, in a continent where only the word vulnerable might light many red flags and activate many silence, I will just leave two examples to illustrate my point. So, to be vulnerable enough to engage in forgiveness, when I was training new teachers, I will give you an example. When I was training new teachers 13 years ago, in my very first time in Brazil, as you know, it was a former Portuguese territory, I started the training with them, and I started to realize that something was not quite right, and I didn't know why. What was it? And well, I realized that the history books are more subjective than I thought. And history taught in schools is in certain degree colored by the lens of those who write it. I understood there. Having been in contact with certain feelings of sorrow and bitterness that traversed centuries and desemboweled in my very own classroom in Rio de Janeiro 13 years ago with my Brazilian students, I decided to stop everything. We have to stop the training now. What's going on here? I feel something is not right. And performed a ritual of forgiveness with them, out of the blue. And I asked for all of us to pray for our ancestors, colonists and colonized, conveying our love, affirming our honoring of their lives and sacrifices, presenting our availability for repairing the old wounding through forgiveness and compassion, so that we can release, that darkness that I felt in the heart. What's going on here? Because some of them have sent me a poem. It was beautiful. It was called Beauty. And then I wanted to know more about that poetess, Brazilian. And the next poem I saw, it has so many sorrow against the Portuguese. Just what's going on here? Okay, we have to do something about it. As candid as it might seem, I can say that the night before that ritual, I had been violently attacked by a cat, driven to a favelas hospital in the townships of Rio de Janeiro alone, where I was at 3 a.m. in the morning. It was an extremely transformative experience. Being half European, being with a very swollen and sore ankle, with no tetanus or rabies vaccines, alone in Rio de Janeiro, favelas by night, I can tell you it was the price I had to pay. But there's always one for the upcoming release. So after the prayers, I can tell you the clouds in the air disappeared in the classroom. And I felt there was a renewed flow of the energy and new possibilities blossomed out of that honest effort to build new standpoints for our common purposes. So I believe in the power of prayer and in the power of love. Finally, my experience of being in a coma in a ventilator for 7 days with COVID pneumonia, and not because here I want any kind of sympathy or whatever. Each one of us has their own crisis, and I'm very much in connection with the human. I was therapist for 20 years, so I was always in connection with human sorrow and suffering and deep pain. But it was an extraordinary experience that I would like to share some insights that were precious to me. This life-death experience, I felt the most intense of my existence. I would humbly parallel its components to the last stage of the alchemic process of conscious evolution, the rubedo, or the red opus. Red is life force, blood, red of love, red of passion, red of rebirth. And in this stage, we will never be the same person. We are not the same person. We are definitely transformed. And you can think about a major crisis in your life and the point where you rebirthed, the point where you healed, the point where you could process through the sorrow, whatever the lesson was, the teaching was there for you. And what was the moment where you rebirthed? You felt the energy coming again, the purpose again, the wish to do things again, the wish to commit, to be present. I was shown during that experience in the hospital that everything is right in a sense, through the light of a deeper clarity. I was blessed by a stronger sense of gratitude for everything. The air, I cannot take for granted because I could not breathe, so the air, I no longer take it for granted. The sun, my family, my friends, they are no small things. And in the end it will be very helpful. The sense of gratitude we may acquire through life, the inner harmony that we might achieve, and the depth of consciousness that is exactly the same that will lead us into the last great spiritual initiation, death into rebirth, when we go. So, finalizing, when we go through life at the best of our ability, practicing the presence in the now, embracing the peer paradoxes into a new synthesis, the valuing of the process, at least as much as we value the end result, the final product, the aim achieved. Sharing the peer's pleasure, the last of the 4 P's, pleasure of being alive, of sharing together the biggest adventure of life itself. So, if we go through life consciously, we are really capable of renewing ourselves. We are able to fully enjoy the feeling of being at home in our body-soul, and we can give birth to ever more complete and fulfilled and purposeful, unified in our human and divine natures, the versions of who we really are and meant to be and become in this earth. Thank you very much. Blessed be.